Namo Buddhaya, the Satasahasrika Prajnaparamita Sutram, the large sutra on perfect wisdom, the chapter 47th, the discipline of greed. As isolated from their defilements, the Lord, they will in their own being be isolated from the need for the discipline of greed, hate, and delusion, isolated from the tokens of the defilements. They will in their own being be isolated from the tokens of greed and hate and delusion, isolated from the signs of their defilements. They will in their own being be isolated from the signs of greed, hate, and delusion, isolated from both the points to be shunned and from their antidotes. In their own being isolated from the attributes of greed, hate, and delusion will be those bodhisattvas, great beings, who resolutely believe in this deep perfection of wisdom. Subhuti, Destined, gatika, for that will be those bodhisattvas, great beings, who will understand this deep perfection of wisdom. The Lord, they will be destined for the knowledge of all modes. Subhuti, will the bodhisattva, the great being who is destined for the knowledge of all modes, be resort gati of all beings? The Lord, yes, Subhuti. It is hard to do. Subhuti, doers of what is hard are those bodhisattvas, great beings, who have put on this armor. All beings will be led to nirvana, and yet therein no being, and no concept of a being is apprehended. Lord, so it is Subhuti, so it is moreover Subhuti, the armor of that bodhisattva, the great being, is not tied up with form, etc. And why? Because absolute form, etc. doesn't exist, and also not the bodhisattva's armor, therefore it is said but not tied up with form surely in this armor, and so with feeling, etc., to the knowledge of all modes. It is devoted to one aim only. Subhuti, of that bodhisattva, the great being, who has thus put on the great armor, all beings will be led to nirvana. Two stations should not be expected: the level of a disciple or a level of a Pratyeka Buddha. It is impossible, O Lord. It cannot be that the bodhisattva, great being, who has thus put on the armor, I will lead all beings to nirvana, should fall in the level of a disciple or Pratyeka Buddha. That cannot possibly be. And why? Because the bodhisattva, the great being, hasn't hemmed in the boundaries but on the armor for the sake of beings. The Lord, for that reason do you, Subhuti, say that of that bodhisattva, the great being, who thus puts on the armor and courses in this deep perfection of wisdom, neither of these two levels can be expected, the level of a disciple or Pratyeka Buddha. The program, Subhuti. Because there, Lord, that bodhisattva, the great being, has not put on the armor for the sake of a limited number of beings or for the sake of a limited kind of cognition. And why? For the sake of leading all beings to nirvana, and for the sake of the cognition of the knowledge of all modes, has the bodhisattva, the great being, put on the armor. The Lord, so it is, Subhuti, so it is. It is not for the sake of a limited number of beings that the bodhisattva, the great being, has put on the armor, but on the contrary, for the sake of leading all beings to nirvana and for the cognition of the knowledge of all modes, has the bodhisattva, the great being, put on the armor. It offers no basis. Subhuti, deep, O Lord, is this perfection of wisdom. She is not to be developed by anyone, nor should anything be developed, nor should one develop anywhere. And why? Because in this deep perfection of wisdom, one doesn't get at the full reality of any Dharma which would develop, or which he would develop, or through which he would develop. A development of space, O Lord, it is this development of the perfection of wisdom, a development of all dharmas, a development of what is not, a development of not taking hold of, a development which is really an undevelopment, and is this development of the perfection of wisdom. The Lord, of what, Subhuti, is the development of the perfection of wisdom and undevelopment of development. Subhuti, of form, this is an undevelopment of feeling, etc., to the knowledge of all modes. The Lord, so it is, Subhuti, so it is. This development of perfect wisdom is an undevelopment of the development of form, etc., to the knowledge of all modes. No settling down. And the Lord further said, Amantrayate, to the Venerable Subhuti, the irreversible Bodhisattva, great being, should thoroughly ponder on this deep perfection of wisdom, but then he doesn't settle down in this deep perfection of wisdom as if it were a real thing. And so he should thoroughly ponder on the other five perfections, etc., on the knowledge of all modes. But then he doesn't settle down in the knowledge of all modes. But then that irreversible Bodhisattva great being, who courses in this the perfection of wisdom, doesn't look upon the critical arguments and hints of others as having validity. He doesn't go by someone else whom he puts in his trust in. He doesn't partake of thoughts connected with greed, hate, or delusion. He is not deprived of the six perfections, and when this deep perfection of wisdom is being taught, he will not tremble, be frightened, or terrified, nor will his mind turn back, but he delights in hearing this deep perfection of wisdom, and hearing and having heard it, he takes it up, studies it, bears it in mind, teaches it, attends wisely to it, and progresses to thatness. One should know, Subhuti, that in a former life already that irreversible Bodhisattva great being has asked questions and counter questions about this deep perfection of wisdom and has learned it and wisely attended to it. And why? Because the irreversible Bodhisattva, when this deep perfection of wisdom is being taught, doesn't tremble, is not frightened or terrified, is not cowed or despondent, and his mind doesn't turn back on it. In addition, when he has heard it, he learns and studies it, bears it in mind and preaches it, and wisely attends to it. Subhuti. How should a bodhisattva who, when this deep perfection of wisdom is being taught, doesn't tremble, etc., doesn't allow his mind to turn back or apprehend this deep perfection of wisdom? The objective support. The bodhisattva and the great being should apprehend this deep perfection of wisdom through a series of thoughts inclined to the knowledge of all modes. Subhuti. How does the bodhisattva, the great being, through a series of thoughts inclined to the knowledge of all modes, have a perception of this deep perfection of wisdom? Lord, the bodhisattva has a perception of this deep perfection of wisdom through a series of thoughts inclined to emptiness, the silence, the wishless, to space, etc., to non-production and non-stopping, to non-defilement and non-purification, to suchness, the Dharma element, the relative element, sameness, the unthinkable element, the unaffected, to a dream, etc., to a magical creation. Subhuti. When the Bodhisattva, the great being, has a perception of this deep perfection of wisdom through a series of thoughts inclined to emptiness, etc., to a dream, and a magical creation, does he then perceive form of feeling, etc., to the knowledge of all modes? The Lord. When a bodhisattva courses in perfect wisdom, he doesn't perceive form, etc., to consciousness, etc., to the knowledge of all modes. And why? Because the knowledge of all modes has not been made or unmade. It has not come from anywhere nor gone to anywhere. It doesn't stand in any spot or space or place, and its definition cannot be apprehended, nor its coming or going, but that of which no definition and no coming or going can be apprehended, that cannot possibly be fully known by anyone, not through form or any of the other skandhas. And why? Because form is not the knowledge of all modes, nor is any of the other skandhas. And why? For the suchness of form and the suchness of the knowledge of all modes are just one single suchness. And so for feeling and everything up to date in special Buddha Dharmas. This is the end of 37th chapter of the large Sutra on Perfect Wisdom, the Satasahasrika Prajnaparamita Sutram.